Good morning. This is Pat O'Connell. I'm calling to order our regular weekly open meeting for Wednesday, March 15th, 2023. So Michael Smith from Office of General Counsel, could you please call the roll?
Commissioner Aguilera.
Present.
Commissioner Ellison. Present. Commissioner O'Connell.
Present.
We have three commissioners present. That constitutes a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, so next item on the agenda is we'll stand, do Pledge of Allegiance and state pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. Thank you. So next item on the agenda is consideration and approval of the agenda. We have an agenda that was posted Friday evening. And looking at the agenda, there are a couple changes that I know of. So I'll run through those and then open it for discussion for the other commissioners to see if you also have changes. First is we need to table on the consent agenda, utility matters, case number 23-0080 UT. So that would be removed from the consent agenda this week. Similarly, in the regular action items, we have a utility case number 21-00112-UT. We also need to table that item. So that'll be removed from the agenda. And then finally, we got a last minute update on the order that is, it's my understanding that we have an update on the order for case 23-0072 UT that's in the consent agenda. And because I haven't had a chance to see what the changes are, I'd like to pull that off the consent agenda and move it to the regular action item so we can have a discussion of what changed since had the chance to read the order on that case. So that's my summary is remove cases 23-0080, remove case 21-00112, and pull case number 23-0072 from consent agenda to regular action items. So commissioners, do you have any other changes or discussion on that proposal?
I just have a request that we move the consideration and approval of the February 22nd minutes to next week. I just haven't had the time. I would like to go over those.
And I don't have any other changes.
Okay, so I'll make a motion based on what I've heard. I move that we approve the agenda amended by removing item 6, consideration and approval of prior meeting minutes. Remove from the consent agenda case number 23-0080. Move from the consent agenda to regular action items case number 23-0072. And remove case number 21-00112 from the regular action item agenda. Did I have a second on that?
I second that motion.
Michael, would you mind calling the roll?
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
Commissioner Ellison.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell.
Aye.
Motion carries 3-0.
Okay, so we have an agenda. So next item is public comment. Just logistics for those of you who signed up to do public comment. Hans Mueller from our Office of General Counsel has collected the list of people who've signed in to do public comment. He will identify the order in which we'll ask people to come and make public comment. Just for awareness that in accordance with the PRC's open meeting policy, we have 30 minutes on the agenda for public comment and 3 minutes per speaker. So we have quite a few people signed up for public comment. If your intention is to just read a written statement, I would encourage you to provide that statement so we can put it in the records of this meeting, and that will make sure that we have within the 30 minutes time for everybody. And then when you do get up to make your statement, ask you that you'll tell us your name and the name of any organization that you're representing here today. So having said that, it's great that we have a lot of people here today for public comment. So Hans, could you please give us the list of who's first and then who's next?
Sure. I'm going to start with kind of order of which I received requests. The first two individuals up will be Glenn Silber and Stephen Rudnick, who I believe are in person, who I believe we're going to be in person.
Yeah, I see a gentleman moving to the mic. So if you're Glenn Silver, please sit down and then just logistics for sitting in that seat. There's a camera right here.
Oh,
And make sure that your mic is on green so that everybody can hear you.
yes, thank you. My name is Glenn Silber. I live at 70 Hartstone Drive. My wife and I built our home here 10 years ago, and we're really proud to be calling Santa Fe our home. My background is I'm a two-time Oscar-nominated documentary producer and a long-time 20-year producer for CBS News and ABC News. And the bywords of my work have always been dedicated to fairness and accuracy. And a year or two ago, I can't even remember, it feels like so long ago, when I first became aware of Avangrid's attempted takeover or merger, if you will, of PNM, I started following the process like as if the way my mind works, I was doing a story for one of the many TV news magazines I work for. And that's unfortunately just how I think. And the first question that came to mind as I started following this process was, who is Avangrid and what's their record? That's pretty basic. Now, I know you all know this, but I'm speaking for myself as someone who, after a year and a half of following this process, has led us to today. Okay, and that's why I'm here to speak and try and understand exactly where we're at. That led to a year-long process with the PRC and a hearing examiner and this evidentiary proceeding that was covered widely by the New Mexican, and often led to some shocking information, maybe not surprising, but shocking to me. I try not to be a cynic, but when I learned about all the transgressions Avangrid had made around the country, which included, being ranked near the bottom in customer satisfaction, how the people in Maine, the auditors for the legislature, found out that the poor service resulted from this strict adherence to targets of profit, and that there were regulatory violations that resulted in millions of dollars of fines. And then we learned about Iberdola, the company that owns and runs ultimately Avangrid. All of this was presented, as you know far better than I, to the hearing examiner and ultimately to your predecessors on the commission. And we also know without any doubt that that hearing examiner rejected strongly this plan. Now, a lot of times we don't know all the details. It's hard for us regular citizens to follow the process. But this was really pretty blatant in a way. With my background, the way I would rely on documents if I was doing a story about this. And what's happened is sort of become shocking that now after all these thousands of hours and it seems like endless meetings and hearings and corporate filings, we're sort of back to the beginning, that the process has somehow mind-blowingly been circumvented. And it's being reconsidered in a way that is kind of disturbing to a regular citizen like me with my particular background. the story took a twist when the governor seemed to have circumvented the process. And sometimes Occam's razor, as it's called, is the dictum that sometimes the simplest explanation is the best. And that would be equally disturbing because we know Avangrid and PNM are never going to give up trying to do this despite the will of the people as represented by your commission and the hearing examiner. So I'm here today to reaffirm, I hope, the long, hard investigative process that revealed the hard truths about Avangrid's plans for New Mexico. And
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Stewart,
I've got 10 seconds more, okay? Avangrid now claims that circumstances have changed, yet they don't seem to want to have an evidentiary hearing to prove it. What about transparency? So I'm here to implore you to respect and uphold the truth of what was learned over many, many, many months and thousands upon thousands of hard-earned hearings and filings and work to keep this a democratic, open process. Anything else to me would feel like a real betrayal. And I'm imploring you to please reject, once again, Avangrid and PNM's takeover plan, because I don't feel it's in the public interest.
thank you for your comment.
Okay, I'm sorry I had to kind of rush it.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I wouldn't have interrupted you if I didn't know we had.
No, I know. It's just brevity is a skill.
Yeah, brevity is the soul of wit.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Okay, next up and on deck, Hans.
Next up on deck should be Stephen Rudnick.
All right. Yeah, Mr. Rudnick is here, and then who's after Mr. Rudnick?
After Mr. Rudnick will be Mr. Furstenberg.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak about the proposed merger. I'm Stephen Rudnick. I live in El Dorado at Santa Fe. I've been a permanent resident of New Mexico for almost 14 years. I hold a doctorate in environmental science, a master's and bachelor's degrees in electrical engineering. I've conducted continuing education workshops for the electric power industry. I've worked in both industry and academia. I now focus on climate issues, and I define myself as a climate scientist. I publish a climate blog. I think I have a pretty good understanding of this entire issue with that background, not that I've delved into it in great depth. I only want to talk about one little aspect of it. I realize this is idealism, but I believe in trying to do the greatest good for the greatest number, a phrase that was introduced by the English philosopher Jeremy Bentham in 1776. And it was restated in 1905 by Gifford Pinchot, the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service, as the idea behind the greatest good for the greatest number for the longest time is that you do things for the greatest public good and benefit, and that is what matters. I specifically want to address the fact that I do not believe that this is a priority for either Public Service Company of New Mexico, and note the name, Public Service, or Avangrid. The greatest good for the greatest number would be to ensure a livable future in the face of the ever-growing existential threat of global warming. I do not believe that any of their recent activities, either PNM or Avangrid, would indicate that this is even close to their major concern. But I want to focus on one specific issue with Avangrid that illustrates the point. I spent most of my life in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and that name expresses common good. It is a commonwealth. The chair of the Massachusetts, and the article I'm referring to, I think, is in your packet somewhere, and I have a copy of it if you want to see it again. The chair of the Massachusetts Senate Ways and Means Committee is calling for Avangrid to be banned from bidding on any future projects in the state if it terminates its current offshore wind contract. Avangrid wants to walk away from the contract because it cannot make enough money. My interpretation is that they are saying they want to do the greatest good for a small number of people, their stockholders. Turns out I have an emotional attachment to the specific issue because the wind farm in question was designed and shepherded through the permitting process by a very good friend, one of my best friends, who died about 3 years ago. So I'm very familiar with the wind farm off of the southern coast of Massachusetts. Avangrid seems to have a history of broken promises, some contractual, that they have failed to deliver. And I just pose the question to you, is this something you want to take a chance on? Thank you for your attention. I really appreciate it. I'd be happy to leave these comments if you wish.
Yeah, please do it, and thank you for your comments.
Where should I?
Yes. Okay, so next,
Copy of the article.
I believe next is, thank you.
Thank you
sir.
so much.
Next is Arthur Furstenberg, and then who do we have after Mr. Furstenberg?
After Mr. Furstenberg, I have Kathleen Burke.
Thank you.
My name is Arthur Furstenberg. I live at 247 Barella Street here in Santa Fe. I'm on the agenda towards the end is discussion of various legislative bills having to do with public utilities. Two of them I'm concerned about as an individual. That's House Bill 243 and Senate Bill 456. They have to do with grid modernization plans, a large component of which is what's called advanced metering infrastructure, also known as smart meters. And I am opposing those bills because of the radiation that is emitted by every smart meter that gets on the wiring of every house where it's installed. And because it's connected to the entire electric grid, it creates out of the electric grid a giant radio frequency antenna which irradiates the population. And the installation of smart meters has been reported all around the world to have catastrophic effects on health and on environment. I'm opposing these two bills because the installation of smart meters would endanger my life, my future, and the planet that I live on. This is being done everywhere, and I'm opposed to these two bills. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning, the commission. I'm Kathleen Burke. I'm a resident of Albuquerque. I'm representing myself today. How do you do? I would like to say a few words about Senate Bill 456 and House Bill 243. I am a lifelong nature lover and lover of the outdoors. I'm an avid gardener and an avid hiker. I attempt to do my best to watch out for nature around me, plants, animals, etc., the soil. In the line of work that I do, I daily interact with physicians, scientists, and folks around the world who study RF radiation. And you might know that RF radiation is emitted by smart meters, also known as advanced metering infrastructure, according to the Grid Modernization Act and grid modernization plans. RF radiation is a killer. We know that. There's plenty of research, peer-reviewed studies done for decades, back as far as the 70s and probably before that. I'm not sure exactly when this research started coming out, but this is not new news, though it may be a bit of suppressed news that this is the reality. Smart meters, again, emit RF radiation. That's radio frequency radiation. There is no way around that. That is the reality. And RF radiation damages the life of human beings, and not only human beings, but insects, other animals, plant life. It affects all of these beings at a cellular level. It affects the mitochondria. This is not my research. This is research I'm passing on to you, members of the commission, that has been provided by PhDs and physicians around the world, again, for decades. I deal with people who have been harmed by RF radiation from smart meters and otherwise, other sources. So I'm here today to ask you to please take into consideration the RF radiation factor, to not jump into accepting advanced metering infrastructure as a quick answer.
So I'm sorry, you started this speech talking about the legislation.
Yes.
Just want to make sure that's what you're talking about.
Yes, I am. You know, Senate Bill 456 and House Bill 243 both include the grid modernization plans,
But
right?
you were making an appeal to us and we're not the legislature. So that's why I was confused.
I see. Understood, Mr. Chairman. This may be something that you have to deal with in the future. And I do believe those that Senate Bill 456 and House Bill 243 are on your agenda today. So I would like my comments to be part of that discussion, please, sir. One last thing I would like to say before closing is that, yes, I support having a more efficient grid and more efficient energy use. However, the net outcome of having smart metering infrastructure is a loss because of the damage that's done to the public health, safety, and the environment. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your comment. And
Thanks,
Hans, I'm not sure we caught who's next. So if you could give us the next two names, please.
Sure. The next two names, and I believe they are logged in on Zoom, are Jennifer Robbins and Nicholas Robbins. And I see Jennifer Robbins is on the meeting. So go ahead and unmute yourself, Jennifer, and it is your time for public comment.
Thank you. My name is Jennifer Robbins, and I've been a New Mexico resident and a professor living here in Albuquerque for nearly 17 years. And I'm addressing you today because I have heard that there's going to be grid modernization through the House Bill 243 and the Senate Bill 456 that deal with mandating smart meters. And these bills, if they were to become law, really would pose great risk not only to health, but the environment because of pulsed radio frequency emissions. I recently looked at an engineer's report that was given to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, and they had addressed in that the emissions from smart meter antennas and the RF that's created by the switched mode power supply enter a home's electric system. And the result of this is that the entire house is transformed into a radiating RF antenna. As an individual who is highly sensitive to RF emissions, I am greatly concerned as these meters would emit radio frequency in the kilohertz range. Each home, in essence, would, with one of these meters, become ultimately weaponized. And where there's risk, there should be choice. So I really ask that this be considered sincerely by the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I have Nicholas Robbins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity to speak. My name is Nicholas Robbins. I'm a resident of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I hold a PhD in political science. I'm opposed to the grid modernization plans in HB 243 and SB 456 because of the great harm they will cause through smart meters. I've heard mention of a provision that may allow individual customers to opt out of smart meter installation. Even if such a provision were included, the bill would not give us the ability to opt out from our neighbors installing smart meters on their homes near our bedrooms. We would not be able to opt out of smart meters in apartment buildings or at our places of work or where we shop or any other building in our communities. The animals, insects, and trees would not be able to opt out or escape irreparable harm. If these bills are passed, we will have yet another instance of governments and large companies putting power and control above the health and safety of the people and violating the principle of do no harm to those you vow to help and serve. We will be faced with increased pain, higher healthcare costs, greater cybersecurity vulnerability through potential system hacking, and more damage to an already devastated environment. Furthermore, many residents will not be in a position to give informed consent to such developments. Please consider this as you make your decisions. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
And next up, I have Layla Barudi. And then Rachel Hart will follow.
Is Layla with us or on Zoom?
I believe Layla was going to be on Zoom. So Layla, if you are there, can you indicate and unmute yourself? Or we can skip and go to Rachel Hart. Rachel, are you available?
Thank you. My name is Rachel Hart, and I live in Albuquerque, and I'd like to comment on the grid modernization plan and HB 243 and Senate 456. Number one, the FCC lost a lawsuit this past year regarding wireless technology because they have not updated the safety levels for over 25 years. Plus, the original premise was faulty. Smart meters are wireless, and they're made to communicate with your neighbor's smart meter, and they have a range of a football field. Those living in apartments are more at risk of harm. Example, I live in a 155 apartment complex, and let's say on average, smart meters put out 10,000 RF radiations a day. That exposes us to 155,000 RF radiations. What about the 300 plus apartment building just across the street? Some of that is going to add to our exposures substantially. The most vulnerable are young children, seniors, and those with health problems. With time and more exposure, everyone will be affected. Number two, the Children's Health Defense had a historic win against the FCC, and they submitted 11,000 pages of proof, scientific, peer-reviewed, published studies, and testimonies of harm done to children, adults, and the environment. Number three, smart meters will raise our P&M bills. And does the state really want to pay more for LIHEAP and an opt-out fee of $25? Opting out of having a smart meter does not protect you from your neighbor's smart meters as you go about your day. It is especially egregious that P&M is asking for a $25 opt-out fee, and they have increased their dividends substantially. 4, smart meters need to be replaced every 7 years. The old analog meters lasted 30 to 40 years. 5, I am EMF sensitive, and my worst symptom was almost passing out. I was lucky. I figured it out and reduced my exposure. I've seen people who cannot function in society because they are EMF sensitive beyond repair. They have said if you see yourself becoming sensitive, reduce your exposure. 6. Smart meters are dumb because Wi-Fi can be hacked. 7. Fiber optics are the way to go if you want to bring technology into New Mexico. 8. Please do your due diligence. You took an oath to follow federal and state constitutions. Our Constitution gives us the right to privacy in our homes. Smart meters would take that away. 9. It is part of your due diligence to not pass a bill before you have had a proper PRC hearing. I hope and pray my words touch your hearts and minds to do what is fair and right for New Mexican citizens. Thank you. And I can submit this if you give me the correct URL or email to send it to. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next on the list, let me see if this person indicated they would be in attendance, but they also said they were in a traffic jam this morning. Nicole Olanovich, if she is in person in the hearing room.
Yeah, yes, she's here.
Okay.
Thank you. Chairman and Commissioners, my name is Nicole Maestas Olanovich. I have an MBA and an MSW. I live in the South Valley of Bernalillo County, and my family has resided in New Mexico since prior to statehood. I'm the Congressional 2 Chair of the Environmental Justice Caucus and the President of the New Mexico Solar Energy Association, where our 50-year motto is a just and equitable transition. I'm also a disabled veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom and a mother of a 7-month-old baby. I bring these titles to the forefront of my comment because they all matter in the case of Avangrid coming into the backyard and taking over our energy supply. You see, I've been subject to bad government actions at the request of a few at the top that directly not only impacted myself, but destabilized an entire country. We have heard, read, and know the horror stories of Avangrid in the USA and other countries. They are exploitative, non-responsive, bad business, and have proved their failings with lawsuits they've lost around the globe. The burden of this merger does not just fall on the consumers they will take over, but specifically harm the most vulnerable populations like myself. It's easy to imagine being frustrated with an energy provider. We've all been there, but it's inconceivable that we would want to go from the monopoly we have learned to cope with to a whole new beast that has proven to our people and to a prior PRC that this transition is something we do not want. Why do the highest officials think New Mexicans cannot govern ourselves? Why are we sending profits to other countries known to abuse energy consumers? Knowing what bad politics for all the wrong reasons can yield as a veteran, my future is limited. Why would we want to limit the energy future of all New Mexicans? This is an appointed board. It's also going to limit yourselves. We demand that we do not allow another abusive, exploitative, for-profit company coming in and taking over. Every action of government has a consequence. We saw this with the behavioral health shakeup under the Martinez administration, with the consequences of crime, poverty, suicidality, educational drops at all ages, and more. Also, one administration can seemingly make a simple deal with an out-of-state provider, which inevitably harmed New Mexicans on the whole and will continue for unknown lengths. Now we want to do this with our energy, our environment, and those who rely upon them, the shakeup. These conversations have been had. The people have spoken. And outside of a few lobbyists or lobbyist adjacent folks, the people have asked you to deny Avangrid in our state and our future. I humbly add my voice to theirs and ask you to deny this takeover. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Okay, I'm going to come back. I received a message that Layla Baruti is on the phone, so I'll come back and ask her to unmute. Layla, if you're on the phone, you need to unmute. It looks like we might still be struggling with that. Layla, we can't hear you. I believe, let me come back to Layla once again. I believe one other commenter in person is Jim Desjardins.
Yeah, Mr. Desjardins in person here, so he's coming
Okay.
Good morning, Chairman O'Connell, members of the commission. My name is Jim Desjardins. I'm the executive director of the Renewable Energy Industries Association of New Mexico. We have over 60 members, have been in existence since 2008, and our mission is to promote, encourage, and support the transition to renewable energy in New Mexico. I'm commenting here on the variance requests by the three investor-owned utilities in New Mexico on the interconnection rule, which was in docket 21-00266. Over 2 years ago, the Public Regulation Commission embarked on an overdue long endeavor to update the interconnection rule from 2008. And to put that in perspective, the National Electric Code is updated every 3 years. After 17 workshops, multiple comment periods that included stakeholders from all over the country, a new rule was put in place November 30th, 2022. Since then, there has been a request for a rehearing that was denied, and now we have an extensive list of variances from all three investor-owned utilities. Some of these requests are for permanent variances. So in other words, a request to eliminate that part of the rule. The Renewable Energy Industry Association of New Mexico looks forward to a reasonable implementation of the rule, but we believe it's time to move forward and not grasp onto the past. We hope the commission will respond to these requests. Response to these requests will enable the new rule to be implemented in a way that ensures safety and reliability, but also expeditiously. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. So Hans, if I understand it correctly, we have one person on the phone that we haven't been able to connect with yet. I guess we'll give it one more chance. And
Correct. Layla Baruti is the individual indicating they'd be on phone. I only see one phone number currently in the group that I can't identify who that individual is. I'm just asking that individual to unmute, whoever the individual calling in from 505-988-7469. I've asked to unmute or identify themselves. Which they are currently not responding to. Is there, if just as a last check, is there anyone in? And I just received a text that there is someone else in person. If there is anyone else in person that wishes to make public comment that I do not have track of, I'm get a message that Paula McLean is there in person that wishes to make a comment.
yeah, she's moving forward to the microphone right now.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, I'm Paula McLean. I'm a resident of Santa Fe, and I come from a family who settled here 105 years ago. Albert Schweitzer said, man has lost the capacity to foresee and forestall. He will end by destroying the earth. We have electromagnetic radiation raining down on the planet indiscriminately. Scientist after scientist have warned us of the dangers of electromagnetic fields, and their warnings are falling on deaf ears of industry and government. As early as 2012, environmental health professor David Carpenter, founder of Albany School of Public Health and author of 370 peer-reviewed publications, issued a public letter on the plausible toxic risk of intensive pulse microwave smart metering. They emit as many as 14,000 short bursts of intense microwave radiation a day, disrupting body cellular electrochemistry and causing health symptoms from migraines to tinnitus, insomnia, dizziness, vertigo, anxiety, chest pain, palpitations, and memory loss. I had traveled to North Carolina to a friend's funeral last August. I stayed in an inn that had smart meters. I have tinnitus caused by a prescription drug. My tinnitus flared up so badly in that inn, I could not sleep. When I returned to New Mexico, it subsided somewhat, but never to the low tone that I'm able to tolerate. And I figure that every exposure is going to worsen my condition. For 10 years in Colorado, I read my meter. We lived in a rural area. We had postcards where we would fill out the arrow on our analog meter and mail it in to the utility company. I'm glad to do that, and I think everyone in this state would be glad to do that too, rather than have a dangerous smart meter. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we've accepted the public comments from everyone who's in the room. Do we have another person who wants to make a public comment?
He moved our item for Yellow Bird and so forth off of the agenda. I just wanted to, you can say when it will be rescheduled. I didn't understand why it was moved off. I drove up from Las Cruces. I just wanted to.
Yeah, we didn't describe why it was moved off the agenda when we were doing the agenda, and it was a notice issue that had the wrong docket number. So it didn't feel like we should discuss the case with the agenda having been noticed incorrectly. So that's why it was moved off this week. I would, we haven't set the agenda for next week, so I don't know, but would be my guess that it will be next week.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So,
Long drive. Thank you.
yeah, understood. Thank you, sir. Okay, so I think we've succeeded with accepting the public comments from the folks who were able to connect to this morning. Layla, if you're out there listening, we will have a meeting next week also. So there will be more opportunities than this week. So I'm going to move to next item on the agenda, which is a presentation from the Renewable Energy Transmission Authority. Happy to have this presentation. The Renewable Energy Transmission Authority reached out to us for a while ago, and highlighted some of the work that they do. It at least is adjacent to, if not cooperative with, the work we do. So we're very happy to have Fernando and Mr. Bush here this morning to do a presentation. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Chairman, with your permission, just our copies will be discussed here.
Good morning.
Mr. Bush.
As you know, my name is Bob Bush, and I'm the chairman of what typically we call RETA for short, the New Mexico Renewable Energy Transmission Authority. And as the chairman mentioned, I'm here today to tell you about RETA and how we can collaborate with you to help New Mexico grow its energy infrastructure. With me today are Fernando Martinez on my left, our executive director, and Ms. Lynn Mosteller, our general counsel on my right. Very briefly, a little background on yours truly. I'm an engineer with graduate degrees in both engineering and business. A long time ago, I started my career working on the Apollo space mission. And over the next roughly 50 years, I worked in the utility business. I eventually served both as the CFO and COO of two different large East Coast electric and gas utilities. I've now been the chairman of RETA for over 10 years. If I could have the first slide, I'm not sure how our process works here, but there should be a slide. Okay, and could I have the next slide? So this is our board of directors, and I do want to take a second to, I guess the current way to say this is I want to give them a shout out. These are unpaid volunteer positions that serve on RETA's board, and serving on RETA's board is a lot of work. Our board typically meets about every 6 weeks. Our meetings are held with prior public notice and always include an opportunity for the public to comment, just like you folks do. So what is RETA and what are we trying to do? Well, RETA started out in 2007 when Governor Richardson and Secretary of Energy Joanna Prukoff guided a landmark piece of legislation through the New Mexico legislature. The Renewable Energy Transmission Authority Act created a new independent state authority with the power to finance, plan, acquire, maintain, and operate a wide range of high voltage transmission facilities. We only had one specific requirement, and that was that projects must demonstrate that they transmit or store at least 30% renewable energy. And frankly, that's turned out to be pretty easy. Perhaps more importantly, the Act provided the critical ability to use a very controversial subject, eminent domain, when necessary. It's hard to overstate how important this legal tool has been. I should mention that to date, our eminent domain authority has never been used in a contested case. Frankly, that has always been what we've tried to do. However, I will tell you, with hundreds of miles of new high voltage transmission projects underway, sadly, I think it's eventually true we will need to use eminent domain in a contested proceeding. REIA has also helped give people some financing advantages. Some years ago, we helped finance the electrical infrastructure for a wind project called High Lonesome Mesa. Over the past several years, REIA has commissioned a number of landmark renewable energy development studies in New Mexico. In June 2020, working with a nationally recognized consulting firm, ICF, we completed a comprehensive analysis of the best ways to use the enormous renewable energy potential in New Mexico. And Fernando is going to show you a slide later that gives you a feel of just how big that is. That study has since been updated and shows what an amazing resource this really is. Finally, we just recently took a realistic look at the potential for utility scale storage in New Mexico. All of this information is available on our website to the general public. And if someone wants to learn more about renewable energy and the grid, it's a good place to start. From the beginning, it was apparent to us that the most effective way to use this act was to partner with private developers who had the capital and the engineering ability to produce large transmission projects. Unfortunately, some people conflate that to say REIA is being bought by the developers. Nothing could be further from the truth. The funding we are provided is through very significant lease agreements, and we do not have financing that has any strings attached. So we've used those abilities to create probably one very successful project. Again, Fernando will show you a little more about it in a minute. That was the Western Spirit Project. It's been in service since December 2021. It's the largest expansion to the PNM grid since the mid-'80s, and it carries over 800 megawatts of brand new wind energy. And I understand as an engineer, sometimes people, we spit out megawatts and nobody knows what we're talking about. I mean, to give you an idea, all of New Mexico on spring day, you're talking about 3,500 or so megawatts to operate the state. We don't use that much power in New Mexico. The Western Spirit Project took over 10 years to develop, and we needed over 700 line, meaning the actual transmission line, and access easements to get it built. And Western Spirit was a joint development between REIA and Pattern Energy, and ultimately it was sold to PNM when it went into full operation. Two of our current projects, I'll just mention, and Fernando again will tell you more about it. I'm mentioning these, they're the Rio Sol project and the Sunzia project, because when they're completed, they will carry 4,500 megawatts of power. That is the largest project of its type in the Western Hemisphere. Now, I want to switch topics a little bit. Well, to date, REIA's focus has been the development of high voltage transmission. And that's its real challenge. We're entering an era where the use of renewables can't just rely on transmission alone for a stable power supply. The power grid in the United States is by far the most reliable in the world, sometimes called the most complex machine built by man. It's a testament to the engineers and scientists of this country and their skill. And I always like to remind everybody it works at the speed of light. Lots of things make the US power supply so reliable. But an underlying cornerstone of that is something we engineers call capacity. There is a serious and frankly risky lack of understanding in what we might call the politics of power about this term. Simply put, capacity is the ability to provide large amounts of electric power on demand. In other words, it can be made available almost immediately. Often, when you hear somebody discuss different forms of renewable energy, the word intermittent pops up. What they're really saying is this is something that is not a totally reliable source of power. Here's the catch. You can't call up your favorite wind farm on a calm day and say, please ramp up to 500 megawatts. It's also quite difficult to do that at night with a solar farm, as you can imagine. As we keep reducing our dispatchable sources of power, the entire delivery system just keeps becoming more fragile. It's not an accident that California was flirting with rolling blackouts last summer. Casio currently estimates California is short by 1,700 megawatts in capacity. And you may have read the recent Wall Street Journal article, SOS for the electric grid, US electric grid. It relates that last fall, PJM, which is the largest integrated operation in the United States, it's most of the northeastern part of the country, was at the edge of blackouts. Many years ago, when I was responsible for the New England Power Pool, we generally tried to keep reserve margins of dispatchable power in the 15% range. Now, I'm not going to go through how it all works, but there's spinning reserve and there's quick start jets, and there's a lot of ways to protect the supply in the grid. And I'm not even talking about things like voltage control and frequency control and those things, all of which make it even more complicated. Notice when people talk about renewables, it's always in megawatts, never megawatt hours. If we continue to restrict generation sources to virtually no carbon emissions, and everything from nuclear to pumped hydro continues to be almost impossible to build, then we really have very few answers left. One is grid level storage from non-carbon sources. And the second is to build a more robust grid. Now, there's some good news. Back in 2007, when RETA was formed, the governor and secretary had the genius to include storage in RETA's portfolio of abilities. And I won't read you the part of the act that says we can do that, but believe me, it's there. We have a real problem here. We are not understanding that we can't keep adding intermittent sources of energy without having sufficient backup dispatchable capacity. Yes, we know how to build batteries, and maybe we know how to do green hydrogen powered gas turbines. And there's a bunch of other things. I worked at a university that's very involved with flow batteries, and they all appear to be possible. Last fall, RETA hosted the first ever in the United States a workshop on utility scale storage. And there were promising presentations about potentials for large scale storage. Unfortunately, it remains clear that utility scale storage, and I mean thousands of megawatts for days, is still not economically feasible. While we wait for more storage solutions, one clear approach to this problem is considerably more integrated transmission network. While the wind may not be blowing in eastern New Mexico, where most of our wind resources are, there may be ample resources right at that same time in Oklahoma or Arizona. Today, there are only limited transfer capacities between these regions. We need to build more large-scale transmission paths, and these areas need to be operated with a coordinated effort. Put simply, Rita is strongly in favor of creating a Southwest RTO or Regional Transmission Organization. A properly organized RTO will be able to plan and develop interconnections that minimize the risk of blackouts because of a lack of capacity. I believe that Rita and the PRC, together with the New Mexico Secretary of Energy, can work to speed up the development of a Southwest RTO. Additionally, we need to look for ways to make it easier for developers to move transmission projects through the legal and regulatory maze that delay worthwhile additions to the grid. Recent develops at the federal level demonstrate government actions that can help. A good example of this, if you're familiar with it, is called FAST 41, a accelerated permitting process. As I explained to Secretary of Energy Granholm last year, we know how to build transmission. We generally know where to build transmission, but we have to be allowed to build transmission. And if I could have 2 slides down, please. So Rita has an action plan, which you can see, I won't read it. And we're working on trying to create successful partnerships with you and various other agencies in the state to move forward as quickly as possible to ensure that we have a reliable source of power for the citizens of this state. And with that, let me turn things over to Fernando, who will tell you about several of the major projects and the impressive economic benefits they have for us. Fernando.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Bush. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I request your permission to bring up the next presentation from Mr. Rodriguez. I believe he has that. And while he's doing that, I'd like to thank you for making the time to get us on the agenda today. Really appreciate it. I know you have a very busy schedule. So appreciate that. I want to congratulate each one of you for your appointments and for your service to New Mexico. We all recognize that the work you're doing here is going to impact every citizen in this state and anybody that visits here. And so we appreciate that service. But as Chairman Bush mentioned, I want to lead into this is New Mexico is blessed. We have a governor and a legislature that's very supportive of clean energy policies. It's moving us towards a clean energy future. Rita's part in this is to increase transmission capacity and get utility scale long duration storage going. That's our contribution to doing this. And we're doing this through working with partnerships. We have a number of partnerships with companies such as Pattern Energy, Ameren, Southwest Power Group, Invenergy, and other developers that we work with in doing this. And the result of this is that we are making our world-class renewable resources accessible to New Mexicans and to the broader export market. It's helping us meet our goals in the Energy Transition Act as we move towards zero carbon electricity by 2045. But we're also helping other states meet their clean energy goals as well. But that's not just the end of it. You know, we're getting these great grid upgrades and some substantial economic benefits as a result that are helping us as we get past this pandemic and into the future. And these rewards are substantial with thousands of jobs and multi-billions in capital investment. And at the end of it, we get an upgraded flexible grid that's going to help us deliver low cost, reliable energy that's going to make businesses in New Mexico even more competitive. And as you know, we're not going to get more world-class companies investing in New Mexico unless we can deliver low-cost, reliable, renewable energy, nor are we going to get expansion of businesses that are already here. Businesses are demanding that we get this clean energy, and we're rising to the challenge. And by working with various groups of people in the state, lots of stakeholders, we're working with developers, utilities, state and local officials, federal government, military installations, and the public to work towards this brighter, clean energy future. But in order to do that, we must maintain communication. That's part of why we're here with other policymakers in the state to make sure we have a predictable regulatory landscape in this state. That makes it easier for these companies that are investing billions of dollars to do business here. They're at risk for a number of years. And so the more we can create that predictable regulatory landscape. Rita does have environmental policies. If I could have the next slide, please. We have policies in place like environmental policies, how we select policies. And as Chairman Bush mentioned, we're governed by a board that's appointed by the governor, the Speaker of the House, the Senate President pro tempore. We have the state treasurer on there, Secretary of Energy and Minerals on there. We report to the New Mexico Finance Authority Oversight Committee every year. We hold public meetings regularly, about every 6 weeks. We also do early stakeholder engagements where we meet with tribes, military installations, counties, public members that are affected by a proposed transmission line. So we have this process, and we're doing all this by working with our development partners. So as Chairman Bush mentioned, these development partners have the financial capability, the design, engineering, construction experience to build these projects, and they help fund Rita's activities. What Rita brings to the table is we do have a number of tax incentives such as property, gross receipts, and compensating tax incentives when we own the project that go along with that. Chairman Bush mentioned we have the powers of eminent domain, which is the last thing we ever want to use. So we endeavor not to do that. But I think the biggest issue with building transmission capacity and energy storage, as Chairman Bush said, is getting the permission to do so. I think that is the biggest hurdle that we face and the one that we work hard on. And I think that's where Rita comes in and we can really help our development partners there. I spent the last 30 years working in various levels in technical and managerial capacities and water, energy, and mining programs, a lot of regulatory experience, as does the rest of our staff. I have 30 years of it. Brian Johnson, an engineer with us, has 30 years of it. Eric Obo, another technical person with us, has 30 years of it. And we brought in a new person that has another 30 years of it. So we have the ability to meet government to government at the county, local, state and federal levels. And that really helps streamline the process without cutting any corners, because we absolutely are not going to skirt any environmental requirements. The next thing that we have available is we have the ability to issue and sell bonds. And so that's part of the attractiveness for developers to work with Rita. If I could have the next slide, please. And I can get into some of these projects. As Chairman Bush mentioned, this was our first, well, our biggest successful project. We did have the High Lonesome Mesa that was 50 megawatts, but this line, the Western Spirit Transmission Line, which is now in operation since the end of 2021, was a 155-mile line that went through Santa Fe County, Torrance County, Valencia, Socorro County, Valencia County, up through Bernalillo County, kind of formed a U shape in there. As Chairman Bush mentioned, that was the largest upgrade to the PNM system since the mid-'80s. It allowed 100% renewable power. In fact, it was the largest single-phase wind farm in U.S. history at the time. That was constructed. 800 megawatts of this power is going along this line. To put that in perspective for the audience, as you commissioners are well aware, 100 megawatts will power about 120,000 homes, or if you want to think about it in gigawatts, 1 billion watts, 1 gigawatt will power about 750,000 homes. So we're talking large scale power here. This was the first of its kind public-private partnership that we formed. That we worked with Pattern Energy on. We owned the project and they helped us develop it. It came about actually when I was energy director at the time, a study that we paid for and Rita conducted with Los Alamos National Labs to come up with this project. And it took 10 years to do it. But at the end of it, we were able to sell it to PNM. It's part of their grid. It didn't cost ratepayers a dime because the wind farms producing the renewable energy and transmitting on this line are paying for it. If I could have the next slide, please. This is just a map that shows generally where the line runs through. As Chairman Bush mentioned, that required 433 right-of-way agreements and another 300 access agreements. And without a single case of eminent domain, I think we did a fairly good job there working with the public to ensure that we could avoid that. Chairman Bush mentioned we probably won't always be able to avoid that, but that's always going to be our goal. If I could have the next slide, please. These are just highlighting some of the significant projects we have under development currently. Two of them are co-located, the SunZia by Pattern Energy and the Rio Sol projects by Southwestern Power Groups. This total line length is 550 miles, with about 350 miles of that being in New Mexico and the other couple hundred being in Arizona. They're both about 500 kilovolt lines, although one is a DC line, the Pattern line, and the other one is an AC line. The Pattern line is rated at 3,000 megawatts, and the Southwestern Power Group is 1,500 megawatts. When you combine these two projects, between the renewable energy development, generation, and the transmission lines, this will be the largest project of its kind in the whole Western Hemisphere, not just the US, but the whole Western Hemisphere. So this is a massive project. We expect line one to be in commercial operation at the end of 2025 or early 2026. Believe we're on track to do that, assuming we get all the necessary approvals, which I think we're on track to get those, although I don't want to get ahead of myself on those because, you know, those are in other agencies' hands at this time. But at this point, we believe those processes are going well. Another project we have is the Mora line. This is a much smaller project. It's about 114 miles long, but it does connect the Northeast wind power into the New Mexico grid. The next project is a North Path project, which is in Venergy. This is another massive project. It's 400 miles long, goes from northeastern New Mexico to the Four Corners. It's 400 miles and 4,000 megawatts. If I could have the next slide, please. So get in a little more detail here. I won't get into this because I already mentioned a lot of this information and the economic benefits. I think I'm going to wrap up at the end. So if we could have the next slide, please. This is just showing you the SunZia transmission line, which includes the Rio Sol line as well. As you see, it starts in central New Mexico and then south central Arizona, a total of 550 miles. The next slide, please. This is the Mora line. Just to give a little more detail on this one, it's 182 megawatts that'll be there. We hope to have this operating in 2025. I think it's very important to note here that we're connecting 100% renewable power that's going to go into the New Mexico grid, and it's going to strengthen our grid, and it's going to be available for New Mexico consumers. This is very important in meeting the Energy Transition Act requirements. Again, this is another public-private partnership where RETA owns the project, but it's being jointly developed with Ameren Transmission. If I could have the next slide, please. This is a map of the Mora line. As you can see, this 114 miles starts in Union County and ends near the Arriba substation near Las Vegas. And again, we hope to have this one in commercial operation by the end of 2025. Next slide, please. The North Pass line, again, I gave you most of the details on this project. I'm going to hold off on giving you the economic benefits on this until the last slide. But if we can move to the next slide, I'd appreciate it. This is a map of the North Path. As you can see, it starts in Union County and ends at Four Corners at that terminus. Right now, you see a massive proposed corridor right there that's up to 25 miles wide. The reason behind this is because we're still under early stakeholder engagements and trying to adjust the route to the best place possible. RETA always tries to use existing corridors where possible to avoid new disturbances. Where we can't do that, you know, we have to work with landowners, whether it be state land office or it's a tribal lands or federal lands. You know, we have to go through all those processes. Counties have requirements as well that we need to get. So as you can see, that's just a massive undertaking right there. There's a lot of checkerboard lands that we have to go through and a lot of permissions we need to obtain. And we hope to have this one in commercial operation by 2028. If I can have the next slide, please. This is the Rio Sol transmission line. Again, this is co-located with SunZia line run by Pattern Energy. The only difference, this is a 500 kilovolt AC line, and this is 1,500 megawatts of capacity. And this one is a bit later in schedule in terms of getting into commercial operation. As I mentioned, SunZia should be the end of 2025, early 2026. We're hoping to have this one operating in 2028. Next slide, please. What I wanted to just show with this one, this was part of our study where we're looking at the renewable resource potential in New Mexico, how we could competitively develop these resources, the transmission needs that were needed to do this, and the economic benefits. What this really shows is that on state and private lands, we have substantial amounts of the highest quality wind potential. In fact, 137,000 megawatts of wind power and 824,000 megawatts of the highest potential solar power. So the vast majority of this is on state trust lands and private lands. And of course, anytime we do things on the state trust lands, that brings substantial economic revenue to the state land office, which funds K through 12 and universities and other things that are important in New Mexico. And the next slide should be my last slide. Oh, well, actually, yes, this will be my last slide. And what I wanted to point out here was our transmission study when we first did it in 2020 and updated it in 2022 showed that, yeah, we could have about another 11.5 gigawatts added to the grid by 2030. And maybe we'd have a couple $2 billion in transmission and 3,600 jobs. And maybe we'd get about 8 billion in capital spending. But what I want to show now is that just with an example of 3 projects, we're far outdoing what was projected in the study. If you take the North Path transmission investment at 2 billion and the renewable investment part of that project is 5 billion, and the SunZia transmission line is 1.8 billion and another 6.2 billion in the renewable energy generation, and you got Rio Sol, another billion in transmission investment and even more billions in renewables investment. We're showing that with just these projects alone, by 2030, we'll have over $60 billion in total investment opportunity that's going to unlock a lot of our wind and resources. And our partnerships are just showing that we've exceeded the projections in the study. What this means for us is 16 billion capital investment, thousands of jobs, and an upgraded flexible grid with more interconnections that we're going to need with these intermittent sources. The more interconnections we have, geographical diversity, meteorological diversity, the more robust our grid is going to be. So with that, I'd like to close, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Yeah, thank you both very much. Guess I'll turn it over to see if Commissioner Aguilar has any questions.
Yeah, just on these economic benefits, can you just elaborate more on how they were calculated? Did you hire a consultant, like the number of jobs, for example?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner. In this, we did conduct, as I mentioned, and Chairman Bush mentioned, an original study in 2020, and then an update in 2022. And then we did an energy storage study as well. And that's coupled with some studies that our development partners put together through Moss Adams and other consultants. And that's where these numbers come from. In addition, it's just the costs that they're incurring and that they've put at risk right now. These are pretty solid numbers from that standpoint. And, of course, the taxes were part of these studies that they're going to be bringing, and some of the revenues that they'd be bringing into the communities as well. So, yeah, we did provide a number of studies to back up these numbers.
Plus, we have the actual results from Western Spirit in the counties and what they were able to benefit from. So it's, when you're going out 5, 6, 7 years, you can never be certain, but these are pretty solid numbers for what's going to be the benefits for New Mexico.
Okay, thank you. And I have a different question. I guess my question is, what are you considering when determining whether you want to pursue a certain project, or if you want to partner with a certain company, and So I guess the question is, what are you considering? And then another question is, how do you, I guess, decide which projects do you want to pursue? Like, do you have companies making proposals to you? Do you hold like an open season? Can you talk about that?
Sure, thank you. That's a good question, and we have a pretty elaborate process. As you might imagine, as Rita has become more successful, we have a lot of people who would like to work with us. And some of those, frankly, really just want us to teach them how to make money. They're not all that capable at doing these sorts of large multi-million, multi-billion projects. So we have a multi-step process. If you're familiar with what you use in development, it's kind of almost a stage gate process where initially we meet with a developer, they talk to us about what they're trying to accomplish. And we might initially do a memorandum of understanding with that developer about, okay, we've looked at your project, we'll start spending some time on your project. The next stage, if they want to go further, is we have what we call a project committee chaired by 3 members of our board. And in that evaluation, we spend hours going through detailed economic analysis, the actual engineering analysis of where they would put their line and how it would operate and how it would tie into the grid. And at that point, we then will recommend to the board that that be a project that we start to undertake working in detail with that particular developer. Ultimately, we may, if the project moves along successfully, formulate a contractual agreement with the developer to work in a lease arrangement where Rita will own the project, the developer will provide the funds for the project, and we will be able, when the project is complete, to receive lease payments for the work that we did to help the project get into service. So it's a very carefully laid out process to ensure that this is a project that's capable of being completed. There's no guarantees, these are development projects. But B, the people that are doing the project have the capacity to actually provide the economic resources to build one of these very large projects.
Thank you.
Mr. Ellison, do you have any questions?
Yes, I wanted to follow up on a couple of things. With the Western Spirit line, you mentioned that you jointly developed this line. So you took a ownership stake early on in the development of it. Is that your standard business model? Is that something that you would seek to replicate for future projects?
Exactly. And we have direct involvement in many of the major decisions associated with the way the project is actually built, sited, constructed. Rita members meet routinely with the developers to talk about everything from the contracts that are let to the safety on the work sites to the environmental regulations that are being followed. We are very involved directly in monitoring and to some degree, not entirely, but to some degree managing these projects. And it's exactly what you said. We've developed this model that we now apply basically to the new projects we're starting to get involved with.
The Western Spirit project seems to be very successful at exporting wind power out of state, and it appears that the other projects that you're working on have the same goals. What I'd like to know is, how can we get more wind power to utilities in New Mexico? I note that a couple of our utilities are really focusing on developing solar power as their way of increasing their percentage of renewables because they are concerned about transmission access to wind power. So in short, you're doing great at getting more New Mexico wind power exported. How can we get more wind power to our own utilities?
Well, a good example of that is the Mora line. The Mora line actually keeps, in essence, the wind power, it's almost 200 megawatts in the state. But, and forgive me, I'll spend just a second playing engineer. What really happens, remember, is that the power goes where it wants to go, all at the speed of light. What used to happen in New Mexico is a lot of New Mexico's capacity, dispatchable power, came in through Four Corners and down to Albuquerque, Santa Fe. And it was coming from the nukes in Arizona, the coal plants at Four Corners. It was coming almost from outside the state. One of the reasons we were able, for example, to use the power from Western Spirit to send west is because it, in essence, was replacing the power that came down from Four Corners. That power then goes west into the CAISO, the hub for California. And the actual electrons, if you will, pretty much stay in the state of New Mexico because they're not going to go 500 miles when they can go 150 miles. So it's complicated. The economic benefits are through the power purchase agreements in places like California. However, the actual energy is pretty much staying in New Mexico.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner, if I could add to that, I'd also mention that, well, Western Spirit Project, a lot of that goes to California. Some of that is utilized in New Mexico. And I'd also mention that the North Path with Invenergy project that we have does have a terminus in Four Corners, so that will have availability for New Mexico if if some of the utilities would be interested in purchasing that. We know our development partners are in the process of responding to requests for bids or proposals, for some of the power requirements. And I think it's going to be very necessary that once you've built a number of solar plants next to substations, at some point to balance it out, you're going to need more wind power without question. So.
Right. And I understand the physics of it. I was mainly referring to the contractual arrangements that it seems like, our local utilities are not buying or developing the kind of wind that, you would think you would want to in order to have resource diversity because of transmission issues. And even if the power physically is staying within New Mexico, obviously, if a balancing authority has got a whole bunch of solar and very little wind, they're going to have to deal with the variability of that solar. I guess one other question, folks are talking a lot about advanced conductors and reconductoring. To what extent do you see that as an alternative to building new transmission lines? If we could very easily replace your standard conductors with advanced conductors that could potentially carry twice the amount of power?
It's a great question. Unfortunately, high temperature superconductors are only in the lab at the moment, as you probably know.
No, let me clarify. I mean, not superconductors. I mean, maybe you don't have the right terminology, but the lines themselves. So instead of your typical lines, there are now advanced lines where you're getting maybe 30% more aluminum at the same weight because you're not using your steel cable as in the interior.
Right. I understand your question now. Once you're past, I mean, there are 1 million kilovolt lines in China. Where else? But generally in the United States, about the highest anybody has gone is 750,000 volts. And the equipment for that is still economically difficult to deal with unless you're going a very long way. There's a few in the Midwest. Here, I mean, you see that there's a 525,000 volt DC line that Pattern Energy is working on. That's the SunZia line. And that's a good example of what you're talking about. I mean, you're at 3,000 megawatts. That's almost the entire state of New Mexico. So can you reconductor lines to add capacity? Yes. But I think the more important issue is what I tried to say during my earlier remarks. We need to connect the states, not just do all this internally to New Mexico. And I ran NEPO for a while. I was very involved in some of the early days of how the New England Power Exchange actually got built. And what that did for New England is it allowed everybody to share different resources in economic dispatch, which meant you always use the cheapest power first. We can do some of those same things if we have better interconnections between Colorado and Arizona and Nevada. But individual state utilities are not up for that task. We need an overriding kind of NEPOOL or PJM operation for the Southwest. Utilities are very reluctant to do these sorts of things. There's very complicated economics associated with people sharing between states. I believe it takes organizations like yours and ours and Sarah Cottrell, Probst, the Secretary of Energy here. We need to work together to encourage everybody to start working faster on an RTO, because I think the solution for a lot of this, and that would allow us to do some of the things you mentioned, to reconduct our individual pathways to have higher capacities. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the presentation and the discussion. I was hoping for a rich discussion, and I think we got it. So thank you for being
Chairman,
here.
Can I say one more thing? Sorry.
Sure.
I actually was going to ask another question about what you just talked about, because you had mentioned the benefits of regional markets. So I was going to ask to elaborate on that, but I think you just did. And it would not surprise you to hear, I'm sure, that I agree with you on the benefits there. So thank you for sharing that. I did want to ask one other question about what you consider when deciding when to, for example, like build underground or stay above ground, like what, and sort of what you consider when there are like environmental issues that might warrant like going underground. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. Undergrounding for any significant distance is still extremely expensive. And it's also not very reliable. We don't have the technology yet to put 345,000 volt lines, remember it's 3-phase, or even higher, 500,000 volt lines underground for very long. For a while, the SunZia project was going to underground a few spots to try and create flyways for the United States Air Force to go into White Sands. They don't need to do that anymore. They found other paths that don't affect White Sands operations. And those individual lines were only 15, 25 miles and extremely, again, expensive. The bottom line is undergrounding is an economic issue, but it's also really a technology issue. It's one thing to underground for 10 or 15 miles. It's another thing to underground for 500 miles. We don't have the technology to do that. Now, maybe if we can ever get to high temperature semiconductors, we could do something like that, but there are no viable economic solutions to underground high voltage lines for long distances yet. Not just in the United States. I mean, in the world, there's a few long underwater lines in different parts of the world, particularly in Europe. The company I worked for many years ago, Northeast Utilities, we had a connection between Connecticut and Long Island that was about 60 miles long, and it was an underwater 115,000 volt line. But even that, we had all sorts of problems with. So I know it would be nice if we could put power lines underground where nobody can see them. But right now, we just don't know how to do that yet.
And Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, I'll also add, in addition to the technical and economic feasibility analysis we do, we also look at whether it be environmentally sound or not, because sometimes it's not. And so there's reasons for if we determine that it might be environmentally unsound, like for instance, going under the Rio Grande or something like that. There's other considerations as well. And
I mean, just to give you a quick example, I don't want to keep going on, but we had under the Hudson lines, under the East River, when I worked for Public Service Electric and Gas in New Jersey, they were in concrete tunnels that were actually built under the river, and the physical power lines were inside the tunnel. Imagine what that costs.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And thank you for the presentation. Transmission is clearly a very important aspect to many of the goals that we have in New Mexico. So thank you for your work with that as well.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, I know.
Okay, so next item on the agenda is always a delight because I don't know what's coming next. I'll turn it over to Hans for introduction of Employee of the Month.
My understanding, Commissioner, is that Christopher Ryan would be presenting for Employee of the Month, if I'm not mistaken.
Hans, if I may interject, it's actually myself, Christopher Dunn.
Wrong, Christopher. Sorry, Chris.
Not a problem. With that, if it's all right, I'll go ahead and proceed, Commissioners.
Yeah, please do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be presenting this recognition today. My name is Christopher Dunn. I'm an economist for the Economics Bureau in the Utility Division, and I've been with the PRC for about 2 years. In that 2 years of time, I've had the great fortune of working under a really great supervisor and a colleague as well. And a little while back, I asked another great colleague of mine, Sarah Valencia, if it was okay for a subordinate to recognize a supervisor for Employee of the Month. She assured me that that was totally appropriate. And so I thought that it was overdue, at least in the time that I've been here, that Alicia Leyba-Tercero receive recognition as Employee of the Month. So to go kind of with the formal operations of how this award is presented in the times that I've seen it, I'll go ahead and read from the certificate. The certificate reads, the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission hereby recognizes Alicia Leyba-Tercero as the NMPRC Employee of the Month for March 2023. Whereas Ms. Alicia Leyba-Tercero serves as the Economics Bureau Chief in the Utility Division at the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, and whereas Alicia Leyba-Tercero has worked for the PRC for almost 12 years. Whereas her nomination states, Alicia is a fantastic supervisor and wonderful colleague. Alicia is an extraordinarily knowledgeable and interacts with her colleagues in a friendly yet professional manner. She has an impressive ability to be able to speak to almost any topic before the commission and provide relevant insights. Alicia is an excellent manager of her subordinates, empowering them to get the job done, supporting them where needed, and encouraging them to grow their own skills and abilities. Alicia also goes above and beyond to assist others, even when it's not specifically within the scope of her duties. Alicia is a model employee for our agency, demonstrating a clear understanding of the PRC's role a keen ability to balance the public interest, and the professional acumen to help our agency achieve its objectives. Alicia is among the very best of people I have worked with in my professional career, both as a colleague and a supervisor. Whereas Alicia Leyva-Tercero continues to serve the PRC with dedication and great ability, now therefore be it resolved that the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission of the state of New Mexico congratulates Alicia Leyva-Tercero on her selection as Employee of the Month for March 2023. And so again, I just really appreciate Alicia as a colleague and a supervisor that's been supportive for myself, our entire bureau, and our entire division, and the PRC's work. And I think that she is very deserving of this recognition.
Well, thank you, Christopher, for that presentation and for bringing your nomination forward, and congratulations to Alicia. Thank you for the work you do.
Congratulations, Alicia.
Congratulations.
Great. So then with our revised agenda, we have a consent agenda. Michael, could you read off the captions for the consent items remaining on the agenda?
The consent action items consist of transportation matters, case 22-00281 TREN, in the matter of the formal complaint of Gregory Lee against Kirk Moving Company LLC, DBA Two Men and a Truck. That's a potential order closing the docket. Case 22-00284 TREN and case 22-00301 TREN in the matter of the investigation of Enchantment Towing LLC and in the matter of the investigation of Albuquerque Courtesy and Parking LLC. It's a potential order on staff's petition for enforcement of order and potential order hearing, assigning hearing examiner. Utility matters include case 22-00268 UT in the matter of the formal complaint of Odell Electrical Services LLC against Public Service Company of New Mexico, Inc. It's a potential order dismissing the complaint. Then case 23-00081 UT in the matter of variances from requirements of rules 17.9.568 NMAC for electric cooperatives in New Mexico. That's a proposed order, opening docket, and order for responses. Then case 20-00099 UT in the matter of applications for 2021 broadband program support from the State Rural Universal Service Fund as per rule 17.11.10.31 NMAC. That's a potential order regarding Carson Electric Cooperative's request for midpoint disbursement of award for its 2020 broadband fund project.
Thank you. Commissioner, do you have any discussion on the consent agenda?
Nothing for me.
I don't have any discussion either.
So then I would move approval of the orders contained in the consent agenda.
I second.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
Commissioner Ellison.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell.
Aye.
Motion carries vote of 3-0.
Thank you. So next on the regular action item agenda, we have the item we pulled off consent agenda. So Hans, if you could read the caption of that and then just briefly describe what changes were made to the order this morning.
Certainly. That is case number 23-00072 UT, which is in the matter of Public Service Company of New Mexico's petition for a variance nunc pro tunc from the requirements of Rule 17.9.568 NMAC. So as the bench request order that I initially proposed had some light variations, revisions from Commissioner Aguilera, which I think is just going to be easiest. I've gone ahead and hidden his comments, but it'll just be easier to follow along real quickly if I just screen share real quick. And Commissioner Aguilera had requested a little bit of elaboration and had some revisions to some of my wording that I'll just describe here. Starting on page 3, there was a question regarding what the other 3 circuits were. And my first question, I asked for further elaboration from Policy Advisor O'Donnell, and he indicated that those were the circuits that were previously reported to be at saturation. So rather than identify the 3 circuits, I'm now elaborating a little bit that any circuits that were previously reported to be at saturation, what is their current status? Just a red line here from Commissioner Aguilera, taking out the first part of this, but the core question remains intact. A little more elaboration on this question on page 5. Instead of just asking how many are currently pending, just elaborating how many requests have been completed and how many are currently pending to separate those out. Some light grammatical corrections there. And Commissioner Aguilera asked me to elaborate. I just had this information. That section is in regard to the interconnection reporting that is due on a semi-annual basis by the utilities. And he asked me for a little bit more elaboration regarding what Screen 8 is. Screen 8 requires that the utility review whether the generating facility will cause any disruption to protected devices and equipment that may exceed 90% of the short circuit interrupting capability. That was the extent of Commissioner Aguilera's revisions. So I'll stand for any questions.
Commissioner Aguilera, do you have any questions or discussion?
No, I don't.
Commissioner Ellison?
No, I don't really have anything to add here. We're just seeking some information on this interconnection variance request that PNM has filed. So looks fine to me.
Okay, so I move to approve the proposed order in case 23-0072 UT.
I second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
Commissioner Ellison.
Aye.
Commissioner O'Connell.
Aye.
Motion carries a vote of 3-0.
Okay, the next agenda item is the discussion of legislative matters. Legislature is done on noon on Friday, and so most of these bills are either sitting in committees or on tables or racing to the finish line. Commissioners, do you have any bills you'd like more discussion of, or? I mean, I guess the update on the 2 that we've been tracking the most closely is the purchase of the PRC building. And that is for a final vote. And then the other was Senate Bill 434, and that is among a long list of bills waiting to be heard in Senate Judiciary Committee.
I don't have any items that I really want to discuss.
Commissioner Aguilera.
I don't have anything to discuss further either. We heard.
So
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, with the legislature ending Friday, I doubt we'll have this item on the agenda, and maybe in a future meeting, we can just do a quick update of what passed and what are the things that will require our attention going forward. Next item on the agenda is communications with Chief of Staff. I see our Chief of Staff in the back of the room, so Choi is joining us at the mic here. And I'm just going to turn the floor over to you, Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, commissioners. It's nice to see you. I think that this is my middle of my 4th week here, so I thought it would be appropriate to come before you and give a little report on what's been happening and where I'm spending my time, what's happening within the agency, and just give you an update. So starting with things that I've been working on out of the Chief of Staff's office's priorities, first and foremost, I'm exploring increasing the communications within the agency, exploring chances to collaborate where appropriate between the divisions, and making sure that the right people have the right information at the right time, which is a very complicated process, as you're learning, given all the rules, ex parte rules, as well as the rules of conflict and the professional obligations that many of our divisions, looking at the lawyer divisions, have to abide by. We're exploring multiple ways of facilitating this communication, including appropriate technology where necessary, as well as exploring really the limits of those legal and professional obligations on each of the divisions. Another place that we're going to be spending our time is reviewing internal processes and procedures. Over the long term, we'll be reviewing these processes, procedures kind of bit by bit in manageable chunks. Currently, I've been working with our legal divisions to explore the life cycle of cases that come before you, the adjudicatory process, and looking at how, in the long term, we'll be looking at how we can improve those processes and opportunities for revision and growth with those processes to make sure that we're utilizing our resources in the most efficient manner. Another one of my priorities is looking at training and development of our staff. As you know, we have really excellent staff in this agency, and this is a fast-moving industry. There's lots of new information and new thoughts and new practices developed every day. And so we really want to focus on making sure that we're trained up, we know what those thoughts and practices are, and that we're ready to tackle them as we move forward in this. On that line, we are exploring, well, first of all, we're trying to fill the vacancies that we have, and I'll touch on vacancies in a minute. So that's a priority. But we're also exploring ways that we can bring more resources into the agency, whether that's through grants, because the commission is statutorily authorized to accept grants on behalf of the state of New Mexico, whether that's through interns, externs, fellowships, clerkships. There's lots of opportunities, not just with our agencies across the state, universities, but also with the DOE, federal agencies, and other places. So we'll be exploring those. And then last but not least, my next priority is probably once the session ends, which isn't too far away, to build and cultivate relationships with other agencies, both in our state, other states, and the federal government, because we really need to be able to collaborate in the appropriate circumstances. And the best way to do that is to know who to call when those issues come up. And so we'll be exploring that. Talking about vacancies, we have, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm losing my notes. We have a total of 17 positions open across the agency. Of those, we have completed the interview process for 2, and we'll be interviewing for 3 more positions in the coming weeks. That leaves 12 positions. Of those 12 positions, 3 of them have yet to be posted. The rest of them are moving through the recruitment process. And as I said, filling those vacancies before the end of the fiscal year needs to be a priority for us. And I feel like we're well on track to make that happen. We are losing one of our longtime employees this week. Danielle Jimenez has resigned and is moving on to her next opportunity. I didn't get an opportunity to work with her for very long, but I have talked with her colleagues, and for all accounts, she was always willing to take on new tasks and new projects and to lend a hand where asked and where necessary. Over the years, she helped the agency develop legislative tracking and helped keep everybody on task and moving forward through the legislative process. So I just wanted to recognize her and wish her well in her next endeavor. We also have some new hires that have joined us in the last month. One needs no introduction, and that's Colin Gillespie. He's rejoined the commission as Chair O'Connell's assistant, so welcome to him. We also have Edison Jimenez Lopez, who has joined us in the Economics Bureau. There was an agency-wide email about his joining us, but I wanted to take a moment and recognize him as well. Really excited to have him, looking forward to working with him. And then as for the last personnel update, Jack Seidler, who has been with the agency for nearly 15 years, has been promoted to engineering professional 2. So congratulations to Jack. I want to give you just a snapshot of some of the work that our divisions are undertaking. And I want to make this clear that this is by no means comprehensive, because we would be here for a really long time if I was comprehensive about all the things that they're working on. But just as kind of a snapshot and overview, the utilities division is working on many cases, adjudicatory cases. They are providing economic, accounting, and engineering analysis of both the PNM rate case and the SBS rate case. They're providing analysis and will provide testimony both for those rate cases, but also in 2 fuel clause cases as well. The Telecoms Bureau is reviewing the SRUSF, the State Rural Universal Service Fund, project reports and requests for funding. That's a $30 million per year funding there. And in 2022, $11.9 million was awarded to qualifying broadband projects. And then I don't need to mention this, but I'm going to anyway, that they're working on countless other water, electricity, gas, and telecom matters. So utilities has their hands full, as does frankly every division in this agency. Transportation, also very busy. As you're aware, SB 160 has moved on to final vote. I believe it's actually on the floor today. So we might be losing transportation, but at least until next July, we have them. And so that's lucky for us. They have 27 inspections currently going on, dealing with 7 complaints. And of those 7, 5 are being investigated for potential violations. As far as ambulance and railroad transportation goes, there's 7 reissuance of ambulance certificate applications. 8 ambulance carrier inspections are ongoing, and there have been 26 railroad hazmat inspections. The hearing examiner's office has been especially busy. In the first 2.5 months of 2023, they have issued 8 recommended decisions. Those 8 recommended decisions have resulted in the closure of 5 cases through final orders, and the other 3 remain in various procedural postures. There are an additional 15 active cases with the hearing examiners, one of which has had more than 100 bench requests to the party, which serve to refine and limit the issues to be addressed in those proceedings. Of those 15 cases, also 6 of them have gone to hearing since January 1. For ASD, Administrative Services Division, as you know, we lost Renata, our Administrative Services Director, and we have our acting director in there, Miranda. We are seeing an increase in parking expense due to the return to the office that we've been experiencing. And so it's something that I just flagged for you as we are moving forward, because we're going to be evaluating our parking situation as well as our parking policy and who parks where, when, etc. as we move forward and we see what kind of toll this takes on the budget. We do have some available spots for the parking in the Alameda lot. All that an employee has to do is reach out to Miranda. And we encourage, if you're going to be here regularly, we encourage employees to get those parking permits, because otherwise we have to validate by the day, and that's where it's affecting our budget. Also in ASD, IT has been working hard. They have implemented the new network firewall perimeter security using the next gen firewalls. And they, as you know, have implemented Board Effect to help with communication and collaboration in preparation of these meetings. My last note was to update you on legislation, but Chair O'Connell stole my thunder. So I'm glad that we got that taken care of. Senate Bill 144, which is the purchase of the new building, is actually being heard this afternoon in House Finance. And so we will be over there to address any questions or otherwise speak in support of that. And with that, I try to keep it nice and concise, and I stand for questions.
Yeah, thank you. Go to Zoom first. Commissioner Aguilar, do you have any questions or discussion with our Chief of Staff?
Not at the moment. I appreciate the update. So thank you for adding this to the agenda and for the presentation.
I don't have any specific questions. Just wanted to say thank you for your initiative. It sounds like, well, things are going very well with the focus on the personnel openings and working to get good people in those positions. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll second that emotion on the emphasis on getting us staffed up, but also add to that working on the communications within the agency is very valuable, and I really appreciate your initiative and the hard work you've been putting in. And like I shared with you, it feels like you've been here longer. You've been getting quite a bit done. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so our last item on the agenda is communications with commissioners. Again, I'll start with you, Commissioner Aguilar.
I don't think I have anything. Next week I'll be at the meeting in person. So that's exciting for me, at least. Aside from that, I don't have anything.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Ellison.
I might just mention a couple of scheduling things. I'm planning on attending that new commissioners workshop that NARUC is having in Washington, D.C. I believe that's May 1st and 2nd. I think that could be a very valuable forum. So I'm planning on attending that. Also, I am considering attending in person this YRAB meeting, which is a Western resource adequacy reliability group, and I would probably be skipping the first day because that's on a Wednesday, and I'm assuming that we'll still have our Wednesday schedule in April, although that may not be the case, and I would attend on Thursday and Friday, but you know, I will reevaluate if we end up doing something with our open meetings. And I guess I am thinking about how important it is to attend the Western Commissioners meeting in California mid-May. Sounds like a lot of things, so I may have to prioritize, but anyway, just a few scheduling items.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I'm scheduled to go to that Pepsi YRAP meeting, and I need to be there on the morning of the 12th. So that is a date that we might need to not have an open meeting that week or schedule around it. And then it's followed by this NMSU Current Issues Conference here in Santa Fe the next week, which runs through the 19th. So we've got conferences on 12th and 19th. So we'll have to figure that out. And then, I don't know, Commissioner Aguilar, are you planning to attend the CREPC YRAB conference?
I am, and so I'm glad that you raised that. I guess one option would be to maybe have the meeting the day before on Tuesday, the 11th, because I think that, if I'm not mistaken, the conference starts on the 12th and goes through the 14th. So that's a Wednesday through Friday. But I don't know. I guess I would sort of rely on our staff to help us figure that out, depending on the items that are on the agenda for that week.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'd say that's a to-do item. Just thought it was worth talking about here for folks that attend our meetings and count on orders and decisions to get made, just to know there's a potential disruption in the pattern coming in the middle of April.
Yes, and Commissioner Ellison, is that what you were referencing when you were talking about our meetings changing, or was that a reference to the sort of the reevaluation of the open meeting policy? I just wanted to.
No, I was just referring, strictly to that CREPC YRAB meeting, April 13th through 14th. That if I was just saying, if we're going to have an open meeting on April the 12th, then I would probably not attend that meeting on April the 12th. But obviously we can decide whether, we're going to have a open meeting on the 12th or another day.
Okay. Thank you. I think that before we make that decision, we need to know what's on our schedule in terms of cases. And maybe see if any of them are not statutory, if they can wait a week, if that would be okay. But I guess we would need to know that first before deciding whether to move the meeting a day earlier, or if it's able to cancel that meeting. Just my thoughts.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I don't have any further updates. Yes, one more round of opportunity for comment or communications with commissioners.
No, I think I'm good. Thank you.
We're looking forward to seeing you next week in human form, Commissioner Aguilar.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, with that, I would move to adjourn.
Seconded.
So seeing no disagreement, we are adjourned.